Should we jump into a cold plunge? Do we need to do intervals until we puke? Should we post pictures of our watch showing we get up at 5 a.m.? Today, we're going to talk about doing hard things. And guess what? As the person who wrote the literal book on Do Hard Things, I'm excited to get into this topic because I think there's value here. But like social media does, we often lose the nuance and take things to this extreme. So, what we're going to cover today is going into yes, we probably live in a world of comfort where we need to challenge ourselves, but are we doing challenges that are meaningful or meaningless? Are we doing it to satisfy the gram, to give us that feel good hit of external validation? Or because that hard thing makes us more resilient and better human beings. Welcome to Excellence Actually. I'm Steve Magnus, joined by my co-hosts Brad Stolberg and Clay Skipper. Here we go.
Very well said, Steve. Something we've said on here for our first few episodes, but I think it's worth reiterating again, is we are very interested in separating excellence from what we're calling, somewhat jokingly, somewhat seriously, schmexcellence. And the book you wrote on Do Hard Things is excellence. But we're seeing a lot of people on the internet, on social media, turning doing hard things into schmexcellence. And we're going to try to delineate those two things for you all listening today. So let's start here. Friend of the pod, Michael Easter, who has been a guest on a past version of this podcast, he wrote a wonderful book a few years ago called The Comfort Crisis. And I think that's where a lot of this do hard things mentality, discussion, discourse comes out of. It's this idea that we now live in an age of ease and convenience where we're all too comfortable all the time. So let's just start with this question. I'm going to send it over to you, Brad. Is the comfort crisis real? Are we too comfortable? Do we accept that premise from which this discussion is often launched?
It depends. We live in what I've come to think about is a bifurcated friction economy. So on the one hand, there are people who have nothing but friction in their lives. They're doing hard things all the time, but they're not necessarily hard things of their choosing. They're hard things just to get by. They're working 2 jobs, including a night shift. They're having to navigate failing public transportation and catch 3 buses to get where they want to go. They're filling out 17 forms to get their Medicaid to cover their dental care. Like, that individual is not in a comfort crisis. If anything, I would say that their life is probably more uncomfortable than anyone's ought to be. So they don't have too little friction in their life. However, it's a bifurcated friction economy. And the other part of that friction economy are people who do live a mostly frictionless existence. People who do have, to quote Michael Easter, a comfort crisis. We can order food with the click of a button. We can order groceries the same way. We can date online. We can maintain friendships digitally. Many of us, all of our work is done through our computer. It's not to say that life isn't hard. Life is hard for all of us. It's the human condition for life to be hard. But yes, there is a part of the economy that is designed to remove friction. And in that part of the economy, I think that you have, I guess one way to think about it is almost like zombie burnout. You're going through the motions. You're kind of half dead, half alive. You're doing work. Maybe you even find the work somewhat meaningful, but it's also tedious at the same time. And you're not really doing anything that is hard that makes you feel alive. And that's where I think the comfort crisis hits.
Unfortunately, I don't think, and I don't mean this to be a dodge, we are not going to solve systemic structural issues in the U.S. Economy and society on this podcast today. But what we are going to try to do is focus in on that comfort crisis and give you the tools to differentiate between meaningful challenge and useless suffering. So give you the tools and skills to build resilience. We're going to revisit work from the pioneering scientists on the human stress response. We are going to show you how to apply concepts like the Buddhist concept of right effort and a new concept we're talking about called the moat of low status. So a lot of practical application in here. To get us started, Steve, as you mentioned, you wrote the book, Do Hard Things. So how can we differentiate between purposeful and purposeless hard things?
Are you suffering for suffering's sake? Or are you doing it because it aligns with something that you care about, with your meaning, your values, and things that matter to you? Think back to middle school or high school gym class. And all of a sudden, your PE teacher says, you know what? We're going to do some burpees and suicides because Johnny didn't put his socks on right. And you're suffering. And it sucks. And guess what? It's hard. It's really freaking hard. And the PE coach is standing up there and saying, you're going to learn a thing or two about this. What do you actually learn? You learn to avoid the situation. You learn that you only do burpees or suicides when you are punished because your PE teacher is a old school football coach jerk. You do not gain any sort of skill set, contrary to what that PE teacher tells you. You do not develop much resilience because it is pushed upon you. You are not choosing to do it. So when it comes to purposeful versus purposeless, the main difference is it is something you choose to do that has meaning and aligns with something you care about, that aligns with something that has purpose in your life, that leads to growth and development, versus something that you're doing for an external reason because that PE teacher told you to. Because you want to post that video of you sitting in a cold plunge online and you want all those likes, right? You want that external validation. You're waking up early so that you can post your watch and feel good about, oh my gosh, everyone's telling me so how tough I am by getting up and getting the workout done. Purposeful hard work is about doing it because it matters. It's showing up and saying, I'm putting in the training run because I care about the marathon I'm taking on. It's sitting down to write, not because I want to go viral on Instagram and feel good because I get likes, but because this book that I'm working on for years has meaning and purpose and value, and I think it will help others. We have to have those two together. And if we don't, what happens is we just get stuck in surviving the suffering instead of adapting, learning, and growing from the hard challenge we're taking on. It's understanding meaningful discomfort versus purposeless or meaningless discomfort. The bottom line comes to it is like, are you training essentially to avoid the situation and tolerate the suffering? Or are you training your coping strategies or mechanisms to grow and become resilient from the thing?
All right, I think we've come upon our first key takeaway. It's super important to separate real toughness from fake toughness and to ask yourself if you are doing things out of an inclination to say that you're the kind of person that does them versus actually going through the process of growth. The second important takeaway is if you are doing the real tough thing, you know, you're not just posting the picture of waking up, you're not just posting the picture of you in the cold plunge, you're actually sitting it. Is it contributing to something that aligns with your values and goals? Is it giving you a sense of mastery or belonging or mattering? And the answer here is it depends. If you want to set the record for cold plunging and you feel like I made it 30 seconds, now I made it 40 seconds, now I made it a minute, or you're going to a sauna place with other people and you're in a community and like that's a skill that you want to build, then I would say yes, it is meaningful. If you're thinking to yourself, no, I don't really feel that way, but it's a jump start so that I can do more meaningful things. By getting in that cold plunge every morning, it's taught me that I can endure discomfort and therefore I'm a better husband, I'm a better wife, I'm a better parent, I'm a better runner. Then I think that's a great bridge to then training for a marathon or committing to going and dating in the real world, whatever the hard thing that you're avoiding is. I think where people get stuck, where we fall into schmexcellence, is where you just kind of show up and go through the motions and there's no progression, there's no mastery, there's no mattering, there's nothing that you're getting out of it. You can have a really philosophical discussion and say, Brad, when you deadlift and you try to get from 520 to 530, or Steve, when you tried to get your mile time down from 406 to 401, how is that any more meaningful than going in a cold plunge from 2 minutes to 2 minutes and 10 seconds? And that's a valid question. I think meaning lies in the eye of the beholder. You have to ask yourself, is what you're doing meaningful? And that's where you get this sweet spot of real toughness in a meaningful hard thing. And if you can have some of those in your life, then you break out of zombie burnout and you really start to feel alive and vigorous and energized.
I think it's also not just that it can help you grow into who you want to become, but in the sense that it helps you grow into who you want to become so you can also relate better to other people, right? I think there's a way in which this conversation becomes super self-indulgent. I know a lot of the things that have helped me grow can definitely be characterized as pretty self-indulgent practices. Running marathons, running ultra marathons, right? And maybe this is just self-justifying, but I like to think that in doing those things, it teaches me lessons, right? About faith, patience, showing up through discomfort. And all these lessons hopefully make me a more well-rounded person, and that informs how I interact with other people too. I think there's an aspect worth acknowledging here of like, hopefully it makes us grow into a different, better type of person in interrelational relationships too, not just better for our own sake.
Well, that's exactly what the research shows us, Clay. In fact, research on relationships shows us that if we do difficult and challenging things together, this could be as simple as occasionally going to one of those escape rooms with your partner and like solving it together. When we take on challenges together, it creates what we call self-expansion, meaning we stop seeing it as, hey, this just is for me, this just helps me, and we start including others in our sense of self, and that makes that relationship better. So I think you're spot on, is this can be a very egotistical thing. I'm going to do hard things by myself in the basement and jump in my cold plunge or lift my weights and not care about anything. And I'd argue that, you know what, even if that has some meaning, you're almost assuredly missing out. If you can make this as part of something bigger, you're going to be better off.
There's also some fascinating history here, and that is that Hans Selye, the pioneering researcher behind stress, the individual who Steve and I quoted extensively in our first book, Peak Performance, the stress plus rest equals growth. That's all Hans Selye's research. He came up with this model that if you stress a system and you allow it to recover, it gets stronger. And if the stress is too great and the recovery is not enough, it weakens. But if you never stress the system, it also weakens. You get zombie burnout. Towards the very end of his career, he had this observation that he couldn't yet test because we didn't have the empirical tools available to test. But in some of his more obscure writing, he talked about how stress is mediated by meaning, meaning that you could do something that is extremely stressful. And if it is meaningful to you, the stress response that you have in your body will be one where you release more testosterone and less cortisol. You will grow from that stress. Whereas you could be doing the same thing, and if you don't find it meaningful, it actually beats you down. If you are listening to this podcast and we've sold you on the value of hard things, you see yourself, your life is maybe a little bit more frictionless than you think it ought to be, and you say, great, I want to start powerlifting. I want to run a marathon. I want to learn the cello. I want to start knitting. I want to do oil painting. Name that practice, that real thing in the real world that is going to be hard. One of the biggest barriers to that is a concept that I first heard from you, Clay, which you called the moat of status. So I want to get into this thing, but I can't, and I'm scared. And at the end of the day, I'm scared because it's going to be hard. That's the hard thing about doing hard things. It's challenging. In the short term, it is always easier to go with the default, to kind of go with the seamless existence. But in the long term, it's the seamless existence that leads to this restless exhaustion and zombie burnout. So Clay, you said one of the things that gets in the way is the moat of status. Let's tell listeners what it is and how to overcome it.
Yeah, this is something I read about on Substack recently. I got it from a writer named Kate Hall, who is the CEO of a company called Astera. She used to be a poker player, but I discovered it on Substack. But she calls this the moat of low status. And what she says is that anytime you're doing something new, trying to acquire a new skill, you're going to not be good at it. You're going to suck. And for that reason, a lot of people don't do it, right? And that's why it's called the moat of low status, because it is a moat that is a barrier to entry to doing the thing. And you should just know that. We talk a lot on this podcast about how important expectations are, right? You should know that you're going to suck, and that feeling of sucking is not going to feel good. And the only way to cross the moat is the embarrassment and difficulty that comes from not being good at something, which you might also call learning, right? When we learn, it's difficult, embarrassing, it's hard. It is an error correction process. And what Kate said that I found really resonant was she said, you got to learn to love the moat. Otherwise, you are going to be stuck caring more about being hypothetically good at something rather than being actually bad at something on the way to being actually good, right? So you can stay in the hypothetical of wanting to be good, or you can get busy doing the work of being bad at something so that it can lead you to being good at it, right? There's no shortcut. There are no hacks. You have to go through the moat. The bridge over that moat is paved with disappointment and difficult feelings. And so you got to learn to love the moat. I think one more concept here that might be helpful is this Buddhist concept of right effort. Right effort is one of the 8 steps on the Eightfold Path to Enlightenment. You don't really need to know about that. All you need to know is that it's about approaching your meditation mindfulness practice in such a way that, as they put it in the Buddhist literature, it cultivates wholesome states versus unwholesome states. So that could be, patience, wisdom, compassion versus anger, greed, hatred. But really what it's about is, are you approaching a practice in a way that's consonant with the values you're hoping to cultivate, right? So if you apply that idea of right effort to what we're talking about, it's, are you doing hard things that are in alignment with your values? If so, great. If it's teaching you something else, like learning how to suppress your emotions while you suffer, maybe not so great, right? So the concept of right effort here is, are you doing hard things in a way that allow you to cultivate states that you want, values that you want, or are you cultivating states that are maybe maladaptive?
I think of it as a hierarchy of goals. And for most people, at the tippy top of the hierarchy, if you keep asking yourself, why do I want to do this? Most people give an answer that is some version of to be a good person, or to be a better person, or to be a stronger person, or a kinder person. And then everything that you do in your life ought to ladder up to that goal. You want to have kids? Does that work in service of your goal of love and being a good person? You want to run a marathon? Does that work in service of your goal of being a good person, of being a stronger, kinder, wiser person? And to me, if you're doing a hard thing that is creating some friction in your life, that is linked to your ultimate goal, whatever that means for you, then that is super valuable.
I have a question for you guys, as someone who doesn't have kids. Do you feel like you need to be doing hard things like deadlifting, training for a marathon, getting in a cold plunge, when you're already doing the hardest thing, which is like raising a kid, or maybe, to use a different example, like caring for a sick relative, right? Like when you're already doing something really hard, do you need to bring in this extra friction?
I think absolutely. And here's why. Because kids are wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I love my kids. Parenting is amazing. But it's also something that you have no choice over. Every day, I have to show up as a father, and that means doing a lot of things that are hard and difficult, and sometimes put a ton of extra stress on you, and you have to get them done no matter what, right? I have to take care of my child. I have to get her down for a nap. I have to feed her. I have to play with her. I have to deal with the temper tantrums that come. I can't avoid those things. I just have to do it. But as any parent will tell you, is after that, yes, there are moments of meaning and fulfillment, but it's also kind of draining. And I think the difference between me going out and doing a hard workout, which is draining in the moment, is that it is nourishing and building up afterwards. And it is all within my control. I actually wrote about this in Win the Inside Game, talking to author Ryan Holiday, who essentially said, I think you need something that is different from your normal life, that is hard and challenging. For Holiday, it was running. But he used the example is if for someone else who was an athlete, that hard thing might be like sitting in silence and meditating, because it's different from the actual activity or life that they've kind of cultivated. And I think that applies here as well, is that with kids or taking care of someone sick or whatever have you, that's incredibly hard. But I think it gets at that nuance of, when we talk about hard things, it's often that thing where it's meaningful purpose, but it also has a sense of you choosing to do it, and a sense of, it might, to use the Selye term, it might create an alarm that takes you down in the moment, but afterwards you grow and feel better from it, and it nourishes you, often supporting you doing the thing that you have no choice over, which is taking care of the kids. All in with this. If I didn't get a run or exercise in, I would be a much worse dad.
I agree with Steve mostly. I think where there's a little bit of daylight maybe between me and Steve is I think it just comes down to an honest assessment of, do you feel like you need another hard thing in your life? Because the counter example to that is someone who is a very involved parent whose day job is extremely hard and meaningful. Maybe you are a surgeon or a teacher or a coach, and you're still healthy, but for your health, you're like, I'm not going to go on a run. That's hard. Like, I'm just going to go on a walk. Like, I don't have capacity to push myself to train for a 5K right now. And I think that's totally fine. If you feel like you're super fulfilled with your life and you're getting enough of a challenge out of your surgical practice or trying to maintain the classroom or the parenting that you're doing, then I think that's totally fine. I think what often happens is the hard things get conflated with physical activity. And I think physical activity is really important, but I don't think it always has to be hard. I would actually argue that there's a seasonality to it. Is the time to train and do a super hard workout and try to run a marathon probably isn't when you're a resident in medical school or when you've got 2 kids that are under 5. It's going to depend on the person, though. There's some residents in medical school and people with 2 kids under 5, and in some case both, that are like, yeah, like, this is my job and I have no choice but to be a parent. So I feel like I'm going through the motions unless I'm training for a marathon. There are other people that are going to be like, holy crap, I have no capacity for that. And I think both answers are totally fine. I think it's about knowing yourself.
Yeah, I think this is such an important point because I feel like we have so many connotations with the word hard. And I think a really salient insight is that you need to untether the word hard from a specific type of exertion. Because for somebody who's going all the time, pushing, the hard thing is going to be sitting down and doing nothing, right? And so it's really a question of like, is it restoring you or is it depleting you? And it has nothing to do with the level of exertion. I think that's such an important point, especially because I think a lot of people listening to this podcast are not going to be the type of people who aren't pushing themselves. They're going to be the type of people who are pushing themselves too hard and need to do the hard thing of resting.
I think that's what gets lost in like the fake versus real toughness, the do hard things on Instagram or TikTok is, what are all those? Cold plunge, waking up to work out, interval training until you're like drop dead exhausted. They aren't sitting without your phone for 30 minutes. It's not reading a challenging book. It's not even maybe, taking time off work to spend 30 minutes playing with your child without your phone or whatever it is that keeps you tethered to things. And I think once we expand the version of hard to that, it makes a lot more sense and helps more people.
But if you're listening right now and you are finding this valuable, insightful, if we've given you language for real toughness versus fake toughness, for showbiz hard things versus meaningful hard things, if this episode has helped you, I want you to do 2 things. The first is put it into practice. If that is in your own self-talk, great. If that is actually in your behavior, if this episode inspires you to take on a new practice or to maybe change how you're going about a certain practice, that is all the more better. The second thing that I want you to do is pause for just a second, unless you're driving, then keep driving. Don't text while you drive. And send this episode to 1 to 3 people that you think could benefit from it. Maybe these people are glutton for hard things and they actually need to pull back a little bit. Maybe these people are doing pointless hard things, or they're getting swept up in the pseudo performative version of hard things. Or maybe this is someone that you really look up to because they do hard things and they do it the right way. And you want to say, hey, I just heard language for what attracts me to you, for what I find so special about you. So please share the podcast with them. The more people that are having these conversations, the more people that are using this language, the better for all of us.
I have 2 quick things to add, hopefully quick. One is another tool, going back to your conversation on Hans Selye, that I think people can maybe try to use that might help them with this idea of meaning. And then I'm going to kick it over to you, Steve, for a question. But so this tool is, I was listening to you talk about Hans Selye's work and how the meaning we apply to a certain challenge determines whether or not the biological response we have is adaptive or maladaptive. And it honestly made me think of like the work of integration that people talk about after taking a psychedelic trip, or even if you want to take it out of psychedelics, like the idea of shavasana and yoga, where you've done the hard work for an hour and you sort of are resting so that you can let the work assimilate into your body. And I wonder, something I do after I do a really hard challenge sometimes is I'll journal, about like, what did I learn through this process of training for a marathon, or going on a meditation retreat, just, whatever it is for you, like, what did you learn from it? Right. And I think that's one way to think about integrating the experience and drawing meaning from it.
Experience plus reflection equals growth. And the reflection is really important. And to make this super concrete, I'll use a quick story from powerlifting. We're still stuck in sport, but at least we're not talking about running for a minute. Something that I realized from my deadlift is that when I approach the bar and it is really heavy, for a heavy single, maybe a weight I've never touched before or a weight I haven't touched in a while, there is this propensity to rush the lift, to just go up to the bar and essentially yank it off the ground. Why? Because I'm feeling some anxiety about how hard it's going to be. Yanking the bar off the ground is never a good way to make a big lift. How do you make a big deadlift? Is you take your time, you're patient, you brace, you take slack out of the bar. The bar should come off the ground slow. It should feel like you're never going to be able to move it. And paradoxically, that feeling of not being able to move it is what allows you to lock it out at the top because you've braced well. Whereas if you just rush up to the bar and get that thing moving, you get over the fear and the discomfort, but you're never able to finish the lift. Now, that is valuable for making a good deadlift, but that's also so valuable for life. Because whenever I am now in a situation where I feel that anxiety about how hard it's going to be, my temperament, my inclination is just to rush, to just go through like a bull in a china shop, because I don't want to sit with the discomfort, with the doubt, with the uncertainty of, is this going to work or not? And I'm certainly not perfect, but now, thanks to my physical practice, in those moments, I'm able to say, don't rush the lift. Don't rush the lift. Don't send that email. Give it 2 weeks to unfold on its own. Don't force my kid into a certain pathway. Let them try to figure it out on their own first. Don't rush the lift. That doesn't happen without the reflection. Without the reflection, it's just deadlifting. But with that reflection, it becomes this life lesson that ladders up to my broader goals.
Before we get out of here and we bring it home, Steve, you made a really interesting point, I think, in a recent Instagram post. You said that like one thing that elite athletes are really good at is they're not good at surviving discomfort. They're really good at learning how to navigate discomfort. I think that's like really well put and really important nuance. And I'm wondering if you can draw it out here.
Absolutely. In the research, we call it using avoidance focused coping mechanisms, meaning when you're trying to survive, you're just saying, how do I avoid this thing? How do I tolerate it? How do I get through this moment? And what research tells us is we generally don't, to use Brad and yours language, reflect, learn, and grow from it. We just realize, okay, I can tolerate 30 seconds of that lift or that run and like whatever. What elite athletes or elite performers do is they use problem-focused coping, which is essentially, what skill or coping strategy am I going to try to use in this situation so that I learn how to deal with it and navigate it better? Sometimes that coping strategy is literally giving in and saying, you know what, today it's not worth it. I'm tired. If I keep pushing through, I'm going to be not good and burned out. It's time to go rest, like call it a day. Sometimes that navigating it is figuring out, okay, how do I bargain with myself saying, yeah, I'll consider quitting, but in the next mile, the next, lamppost I get to, the next page, like just breaking it down, you learn how to navigate. Sometimes that navigating is learning how to shift your self-talk or your focus and what your attention is tuned to, which changes your experience. And what elite athletes have or develop is a diverse toolkit because they've learned not just to tolerate or to suffer, but to bring the tool that is going to help them in that moment. Because what we know is that no tools work all the freaking time. So elite athletes are really good. In fact, they studied this. They studied this in elite marathoners like Frank Shorter back in the day. And what they found between him and other people who were still runners, but not that good, is that he was an expert at just cycling through and switching tools. The others tried their suffering tool. They got stuck it didn't work, and they're like, well, crap, I still am in this marathon. What do I do? Develop a diversity of tools.
I love that idea of a diverse toolkit, and I think that is a good signpost for an episode we should do here in the future. I'm going to go ahead and say we are going to do it in the future. Tools for learning how to navigate discomfort, difficulty. So y'all have that to look forward to. We want to give you those tools. That is a big part of why we created Excellence, actually. But we also want to be respectful of your time. So we're going to end this episode today. I'm going to try to briefly summarize some of the key points. You fellas keep me honest. Before I do that, I just want to reiterate what Brad said. If you found a tool in here helpful, or you thought of someone else who might find a tool helpful, please, please, please send this to them. This is, if you want to support our work and you don't want to Venmo me some cash, this is the best way you can support our work, right? Is you can say, hey, I really enjoyed this podcast. I found it insightful. I found it entertaining. And I think you will too. And pass it along to one other person. So doing hard things. We believe doing hard things is an important part of growing and making yourself more resilient. The key is to do a purposeful hard thing versus a purposeless hard thing. And what do we mean by that? It means doing something hard that has meaning and is going to make you more closely aligned with your values rather than just suffering for suffering's sake. If you want to use that idea of the right effort from Buddhism, it is doing a practice in such a way that it helps you cultivate, again, those values that you want to stand for and the type of person that you want to become. Brad very nicely summed up the research from Hans Selye, which said that stress is not the only thing that matters. It is how we interpret that stress, and the meaning we give to it will determine whether or not the biological response we have is adaptive or maladaptive and how much we will grow from it. We talked briefly about the moat of low status, which is anytime you're trying something hard or new, you're not going to be good for a little while, and you just have to expect and come to love that discomfort because that is the cost of learning. You determine what's hard. Hard doesn't necessarily mean it's going to take a lot of effort or exertion. It might be resting or doing something that is, more thought of as soft or easy. But if that's hard for you because you're always a pusher, then it's hard for you. And you determine the meaning. So as Brad said, experience plus reflection equals growth. So spend some time reflecting on these hard things that you do and trying to understand how they have brought meaning to your life. And lastly, one more shorthand from Steve there. Learn how to give yourself a toolkit that allows you to navigate suffering rather than just merely survive it. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Steve. Thanks to you all for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, be excellent to each other.